It was Friday night at Lincoln High School, and the stadium was buzzing. Parents filled the bleachers, cheerleaders practiced their chants, and the marching band warmed up under the lights. The crowd had come for the biggest football game of the season, Lincoln Lions versus their longtime rivals, the Westfield Hawks. But in a quiet corner of the bleachers, just below the flagpole near the end zone, an old man sat completely alone. His name was Walter Jennings, though few in the crowd knew that. He wore a faded army green field jacket, polished boots, and a black cap that read U.S. Veteran in gold thread. In his lap, wrapped in both hands, rested a neatly folded American flag, creased, clean, and obviously cared for. He sat upright, still and silent. Around him, the seats were mostly empty. No one sat within 5 rows. A few teens passed by and stared. One boy whispered, "He looks like one of those guys who talks to ghosts." Another muttered, "Why is he even here?" No one sitting with him. Walter didn't react. His eyes stayed fixed on the field. From the sidelines, Ethan Reyes, the team's starting quarterback, noticed the man. At first he didn't think much of it. The guy had shown up to games before, always sitting in that same spot, always alone. But something about the way he held the flag tonight felt heavier. During warm-ups, Ethan saw a group of students walk past Walter laughing. One of them mockingly saluted behind his back. Another made a clicking noise like a rifle and snorted. No one stopped them. Most didn't notice. But Ethan did. He looked to Coach Williams, who was busy adjusting the playbook, then glanced back at the old man by the flagpole. His gut twisted. Something didn't feel right. Walter Jennings had been coming to these games for years, and yet, somehow, he was still invisible. But not for long, because tonight, on this field, under these lights, everything was about to change, and it would start with a team that finally decided enough was enough. As the halftime whistle blew, the energy in the stadium shifted. The band marched onto the field. Concessions lines grew. Parents checked their phones, while students crowded near the snack stands, laughing and tossing popcorn at each other. And near the flagpole, Walter Jennings remained still, his hands folded neatly over the American flag in his lap. But not everyone ignored him. From a few rows behind, 3 students, members of the JV squad not suited up for the game, sat eating nachos. One of them, Zach, nudged the others and nodded toward Walter. "Why is that old guy always sitting there?" he muttered loud enough to be heard. "You think he even knows what sport this is?" The others chuckled. One added, "Maybe he thinks it's D-Day." A few more laughs followed. No one stopped them. A couple of adults glanced over but looked away. One usher quickly turned back to his hot dog. Meanwhile, Ethan Reyes sat on a bench, helmet off, watching it unfold. He had just thrown a touchdown to end the second quarter. His name was being cheered in the stands, but he couldn't shake the unease in his chest. He'd seen the same man, Walter Jennings, at almost every home game for the past year. Never cheered, never clapped, just sat. Always with the flag, always alone. Coach Williams clapped him on the shoulder. "Good throw, Reyes. Keep that up, and we'll shut them out." Ethan nodded, but his eyes drifted again to the man by the flagpole. Then something else happened. An assistant coach walked by Walter's row and asked him politely, "Sir, do you have a student playing tonight?" Walter looked up. His voice was soft but clear. "Number, my grandson used to." The coach nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "Well, just make sure you're not blocking space. It's going to fill up. Walter didn't argue. He simply adjusted the flag on his lap and stared back at the field. Ethan overheard it from the sidelines. His jaw clenched. His chest tightened. It didn't feel right. Not the laughter, not the distance, not the way a man who had served his country was being pushed to the edge of something that should have welcomed him. He turned to his teammates, Jace, the linebacker, and Marcus, the wide receiver, and quietly said, "That man fought for us, and we treat him like furniture." They looked at him, confused at first. Then Ethan added, "I think I know who he is." And he did. Tommy Jennings, Walter's grandson, had been a star running back at Lincoln High 6 years ago. He'd left for the military after graduation and had been killed overseas in his second tour. There'd been a photo of him in the locker room for years. Some guys walked past it without looking. Ethan never had. Now he understood why the old man came to the games. Walter wasn't watching football. He was watching where his grandson once ran, tackled, scored, lived, and he was doing it alone. But not for much longer, because in just a few minutes, when the second half was set to begin, Ethan Reyes and the entire Lincoln Lions team would remind the stadium and the world that some seats are never truly empty. The third quarter was set to begin. The whistle blew. The crowd clapped in anticipation. The Lincoln Lions were leading by 10, and fans were eager for more action. But something unusual was happening on the home sideline. Instead of sprinting back onto the field, the entire Lincoln High football team remained huddled near the bench. Coach Williams waved them forward. "Let's go. Game's on." But Ethan Reyes, helmet under one arm, turned around and looked his coach in the eye. "No, coach, not yet." The assistant coach blinked. "What's the hold up?" Without another word, Ethan turned and began walking away from the field. Not toward the opposing team, not toward the locker room, toward the bleachers. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd as the rest of the team, every single player, followed behind him in silence. They moved as one unit, helmets in hand, shoulder pads clinking, eyes focused. Not a single one broke formation. At first, the fans thought it was some kind of protest. Some were irritated. Others looked on, puzzled. But then they saw where the boys were going, toward the flagpole, toward the man, toward Walter Jennings. The old veteran looked up as a shadow passed over him. Ethan was the first to reach him. He stopped, then lowered his helmet and said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "Mr. Jennings, you don't sit alone anymore, not on our watch." Walter's lips parted slightly, stunned. His eyes, moist and glassy, searched Ethan's face for words. One by one, the team formed a semicircle around the bench. Some sat on the steps beside him. Others stood at respectful attention just behind. Jace laid his helmet gently on the ground near Walter's feet. Marcus knelt, hand on the old man's shoulder. And then Ethan did something no one expected. He raised his hand to his forehead and gave Walter a full military salute. Walter hesitated. Then slowly, shakily, he returned the gesture. A stunned silence fell over the stadium. Even the opposing team froze on their sideline, unsure what they were witnessing, but knowing it was something important. Up in the press box, the announcer choked on his words. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears the Lincoln Lions have paused tonight's game to honor a very special guest." A wave of emotion swept the bleachers. Some people stood. Others began clapping softly. A woman in the front row wiped her tears with a program. One by one, fans rose to their feet. Then, in a moment that would be replayed on news channels across the country, the entire Lincoln High School student section began chanting, "Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Walter." The chant grew louder, echoing across the field and beyond. Even the rival team's captain crossed the 50-yard line, removed his helmet, and stood with his hand over his heart. Walter tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He looked at the boys around him, boys his grandson's age, offering him not pity, but honor. He placed a trembling hand on Ethan's. "You remembered him," he whispered. Ethan nodded. "We remember you, too." The rest of the game was postponed. No one complained, because what happened in those 5 minutes would matter more than any score ever could. It wasn't about football anymore. It was about a team that saw what others didn't, a community that forgot and then remembered, and an old veteran who, for the first time in a long time, felt like he belonged again. The next morning, the story had already gone viral. Clips of the team saluting Walter Jennings flooded social media. Local news anchors called it the most touching moment of the season. National veterans groups began sharing the footage with captions like, "This is how you honor service." Even a retired general from Walter's old unit wrote a public post. "That man was my comrade. I'm proud to see him get the recognition he never asked for, but always deserved." At Lincoln High, everything changed. First, Coach Williams called for a team meeting, not about football, but about legacy. He brought in a photo of Tommy Jennings, Walter's grandson, who had died in service just 6 years ago. It had always been there in the locker room, framed in a corner, but now it was placed center stage, mounted with a plaque that read, "Gone too soon, remembered through action." Then came the school assembly. Principal McAllister, moved by the team's actions, invited Walter Jennings to speak. Walter hesitated at first. He wasn't a man of speeches. But when he took the stage, escorted by Ethan and Marcus, the entire auditorium stood and applauded before he even said a word. Walter looked out at the students and cleared his throat. "I didn't come for attention. I came because sitting by that field reminded me of my grandson, of who he was and who he wanted to become. I didn't think anyone noticed me, but you did. You saw me. And for a man who's lived a long time, that means everything." Some students were wiping away tears. Teachers stood solemnly, hands clasped. After his speech, the senior class voted unanimously to name that section of the stadium after Walter and Tommy. The Jennings Honor Row, with a permanent bronze plaque and a sign that reads, "Reserved for those who served and those who remember them." The football team began a new tradition. Before every home game, they would tap Walter's bench as they entered the field, a simple gesture to remind themselves of who they played for. And Walter, he never sat alone again. For the rest of the season, he arrived early to games and was always greeted by teammates, students, even strangers who had watched the video online and came just to shake his hand. Some brought flowers. Others brought stories of their own family members who had served. One Friday night, during the national anthem, the opposing team's quarterback jogged over to Walter and placed a folded flag in his lap. "For your grandson," he said. Walter didn't say much. He just nodded, eyes glistening. The truth was clear. What had begun as a quiet weekly ritual of remembrance had grown into something much bigger. A school's heart had been opened. A team had led the way, and an old veteran, once ignored, had become the symbol of everything right with the next generation. A year passed. Football season came around again. The leaves turned golden, the band played louder, and the Lincoln Lions returned stronger than ever. But something, someone, was missing. Walter Jennings had passed away in the spring, quietly, without ceremony, just the way he had lived. There was no big announcement, no parade. But when the first home game of the season arrived, the stadium felt different. That night, as fans filed into the stands and cheerleaders lined up on the sidelines, Ethan Reyes, now a senior, stood at the 50-yard line. He wore his jersey, but over it hung a folded American flag. In his hands he held a small bronze plaque. When the announcer called for a moment of silence, the crowd didn't just stand. They turned toward the section under the flagpole, the one where Walter always sat. It was empty, but not forgotten. The school had placed a new wooden seat there, slightly elevated, marked with an engraved sign. This seat is reserved in honor of Walter Jennings and all those who serve in silence. Your legacy lives on. Purple flowers rested on the bench, the same kind Walter used to bring for his grandson. A photo of Tommy Jennings in uniform was framed beneath the seat, alongside a small inscription. He ran for this team. He fought for this country. He is never alone. Ethan walked to the seat before kickoff. He placed the flag gently on the bench, tapped the wood once, and whispered, "We got you, sir." Then he turned to his team. They didn't run out onto the field. They walked, shoulder to shoulder, heads high, past the bench, past the crowd, carrying the memory of a man who once sat in silence and now stood as part of every play, every chant, every heart in the stadium. Later that season, during senior night, Ethan gave a short speech before the final game. He said, "Some people think heroes wear capes. Ours wore a jacket, held a flag, and never missed a game. And in case anyone forgets, just look toward the flagpole." The crowd rose, the lights dimmed, and the spotlight shone on one quiet seat under one waving flag, a seat that would never be empty again.
If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored to have you with us. Each day we share quiet moments that remind us what still matters. You can subscribe below to join us.